Good evening. My name is Jennifer Rupp. I am the president and CEO of Michigan Humanities, and I'm so happy that we get to share this evening with all of you, both here at the Pasant Theatre and virtually for those who are watching online. This evening is almost 2 decades in the making. In 2007, our first Great Michigan Read was launched, and every other year after that, we have engaged with Michiganders around one title that centers stories from our great state. Hundreds of thousands of Michiganders have taken part of this program over the past 17 years, and we have distributed close to 100,000 copies of free books and resources to connect Michiganders through stories, histories, cultures, and conversations. Most recently, the program has served all 83 counties and more than 29,000 people in 1 year. We would also like to uplift all of our reading champions, the people in our communities that encourage all of us to read, learn, build understanding and empathy, our librarians, teachers, independent bookstore owners, book club organizers, and of course, our Great Michigan Read Selection Committee chairs and their wonderful committees. Without their dedication, the Great Michigan Read wouldn't be possible. Let's have a round of applause for our reading champions. Tonight, we are thrilled to reunite 7 of our 10 Great Michigan Read authors for an evening of important conversations. Before we meet them, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Bill Castanier. Bill is a journalist and president of the Historical Society of Greater Lansing. He has written a weekly column for the Lansing City Pulse for more than 20 years and interviewed more than 1,000 authors. Bill attended and graduated from MSU. Go Green! Very good. Bill, come on out.
Thank you, Jen. I'm honored and humbled to be your moderator this evening. I've already spent some time with these authors, and they are incredible people in addition to being incredible authors. Before I start, I'd like to read what is called the Land Acknowledgement Statement, which I'm sure you've all heard if you've attended an event at MSU. The Land Acknowledgement Statement collectively acknowledges that Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereignty of Michigan's 12 federally recognized Indian nations, for historic indigenous communities in Michigan, for indigenous individuals and for communities who live here, and for those who are forcibly removed from their homelands. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Michigan State University more accountable to the needs of American Indian and indigenous peoples. It's a complex statement. I also want to add that I'd like people to do things that are more pragmatic by reading indigenous authors like Tommy Orange, Louise Erdrich, Hyde Erdrich, Ned Blackfoot, and our guest tonight, Angeline Boulley. Visit indigenous museums such as the one in St. Ignace and the Zebewing Cultural Center in Mount Pleasant. Attend exhibits and events such as the upcoming Indian basketry exhibit at Zebewing, and also join the survivors of the Day of Remembrance for Indian Boarding Schools, held each June in Mount Pleasant, to honor the 250 residents who died or disappeared from there. So we wanted to add a little bit more to that statement tonight, because we think it can be benign otherwise, so we wanted to do something affirmative, so thank you.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing that acknowledgement and actionable steps we can take. Michigan Humanities also wants to bring attention to the important work of partners we've had the honor to collaborate with through recent humanities grants and programs. These include the Museum of Ojibwe Culture, Wayne State University's MI Native Stories, Troy Historical Society's Indigenous Voices, and the Burt Lake Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians' book, A Cloud Over the Land, The Hidden History of the Burt Lake Band. In the months and years ahead, we are committed to finding even more opportunities for collaboration with Native and Indigenous communities and organizations across Michigan. Now we're going to welcome our authors to the stage. I am going to ask you to hold your applause until all of the authors are out, okay? Our first author that we're going to welcome to the stage is Beth Nguyen, who is the author of the memoirs Owner of a Lonely Heart and Stealing Buddha's Dinner, and the novel Short Girls and Pioneer Girl. Stealing Buddha's Dinner was the 2009-2010 Great Michigan Read. Nguyen is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and an American Book Award, and a professor of creative writing at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Kevin Boyle was born and raised in Detroit and teaches American history at Northwestern University. His book, Arc of Justice, a saga of race, civil rights, and murder in the Jazz Age, won the National Book Award for Nonfiction and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for History. It was the 2011-2012 Great Michigan Read. Most recently, Kevin released The Shattering America in the 1960s. Steve Luxenberg is a nonfiction author, Washington Post associate editor, and Detroit native. His book, Annie's Ghosts, A Journey into a Family Secret, was the 2013-2014 Great Michigan Read. His latest work, Separate, The Story of Plessy versus Ferguson and America's Journey from Slavery to Segregation, was a New York Times notable book and Amazon Best Book of the Year in history. Kekla Magoon writes best-selling, award-winning novels and nonfiction books for children and teens. Her book, X, a Novel, written with Ilyasa Shabazz, was the 2017-2018 Great Michigan Read. Kekla received the 2021 Margaret A. Edwards Award, recognizing her significant contribution to young adult literature. Kekla was born in Michigan and currently lives in Vermont. Dr. Mona Hanna is the Associate Dean for Public Health and C.S. Mott Endowed Professor of Public Health at the MSU College of Human Medicine. With RX Kids, Dr. Mona is reimagining how society can come together to eliminate infant poverty. Her book, What the Eyes Don't See, A Story of Crisis, Resistance, and Hope in an American City, was the 2019-2020 Great Michigan Read. Mary Doria Russell is an award-winning author of 7 best-selling novels, including science fiction, a World War II thriller, and a political romance. Her latest novel, The Women of the Copper Country, was the 2021-2022 Great Michigan Read. Mary holds a PhD in biological anthropology from the University of Michigan and taught anatomy at the Case Western Reserve University School of Dentistry. Angeline Boulley is a storyteller who writes about her Ojibwe community. Her debut novel, Firekeeper's Daughter, was an instant #1 New York Times bestseller and received both the Prince and Morris Awards from the American Library Association. It was our 2023 and 2024 Great Michigan Read. Angeline lives in Southwest Michigan, but her heart will always be on Sugar Island. Let's welcome our amazing panelists of authors. You can read more about each of our authors and our moderator in your program, and I invite you to do so. All right, Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jen. As a reviewer for City Pulse, I initially read and had conversations with all the authors when these first books came out, some reaching back to 2007. I discovered several things about these books rereading them. As powerful as the first time I read them, they held up over time. And in many instances, they were more powerful the second time I read them because of changing times. Move this page. Yeah, I need help. Thanks. They stand the test of time, and I found it amazing that the themes of these books were prescient, covering topics as complex as immigration, racism, courage of individuals standing up for what was right, sometimes in the face of personal violence, the importance of family, and the resilience and loyalty that they represent. The great American novelist and humorist Mark Twain is purported to have said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes." We are going to have a discussion about some of those rhymes tonight with these 7 authors. As I read these books, I came to realize that each of these books could be a banned book in other states. Did you know that one of the first books banned in the United States was written right here in Lansing, Michigan, by an author, John Herman? It was called What Happens, and it was seized by the U.S. Customs Office in 1926 as pornographic. He fought it but lost at trial. PEN America, which tracks book banning in the United States, recorded 4,349 books were banned in the U.S. between July and December 2023. In 2024, nearly 10,000 books have already been banned. We have several of these book banning efforts right here in Michigan. Now let's get to the first question. I'd like to ask each of the authors, starting with Beth down there, what's your opinion on the state of writing and the publishing relative to book banning? Has book banning had an impact on your writing or other authors' writing and the choices or themes you write about? I'd like you also to comment, if you would, on what we are losing as readers and how we can fight book banning.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you to everyone involved. And thank you all for being here. The Great Michigan Read was life-changing, I think, for us. And it's so fun. It's such an honor to be here in this reunion lineup. I kind of feel like we should do a dance. Are you with me? Later, at the end. They're not with me. Okay. Thank you. And thank you to everyone involved with Michigan Humanities Council. The work you do is so important with book banning, with communicating to the public about the importance of literacy and literature. I'm always fascinated by book banning because it's really hard for books to get published. We go through so many processes of editing and revision, and just getting a book published is a huge ordeal. We should be banning, people from Reddit, not like books. The currency of information is crucial, and having a book filled with other people's perspectives, other worlds, that's a gateway to a lifetime of critical thinking, imagination, and understanding. That is part of the reason why people read and part of the reason why people become writers. And I feel really hopeful about the state and future of publishing, because I think that all writers and real readers understand that our goal is the same, which is to consume, buy, read, produce, enjoy more literature. The more diverse, the better. And there will always be opponents, and that only galvanizes us to do more.
So I'm just going to piggyback on what Beth said and say what an honor it is to be part of this panel and to get to share the stage with these incredible authors and to share the evening with you. And I'm really grateful to be included in this. The book that I was on the read has been banned, actually. It's been banned by the Texas state prison system. But I think on a broader scale, Steve and I were talking a little bit before when we first arrived. One of the things that I find really difficult the older I get is the extent to which the world is actually constricting for younger people. And one of the great joys of my childhood is my father loved to read. And what we would do is we would go up, I grew up in Detroit. That was just a name drop just to make sure I got my Michigan bona fides out there for you. We would go up to the Thomas Jefferson branch of the Detroit Public Library on Outer Drive in Warren, for those of you who happen to know the neighborhood. And we would go continually. I mean, we must have been at least once a week in the library. And I never had a sense when I was young that there were things I was not supposed to read. And I don't remember going through grade school or high school particularly with any constrictions. Book bans simply were not in place when I was young. And one of the things that I find so incredibly frustrating to imagine is that young people's worlds are now being constricted in a way that mine wasn't. And that's only one small example maybe of a broader process in which the life opportunities of young people have been narrowed in a way that I think is absolutely unconscionable for this society. But it's not a minor one, because as Beth said, what books do is they open the world for you. They take you beyond the Thomas Jefferson branch of the Detroit Public Library and create entire opportunities for young people in particular. And the last thing we should be doing as a society is narrowing that.
As for my being here with these people, I'm just going to have one word. Wow. I had a chance to talk with them beforehand, and each one of them are people you'd like to know. My answer on book banning is, it invokes my inner marketer. Please ban my book. It'll sell more.
I was going to say that.
Sorry, Mary. The other thing I'd like to say is that the front line of resistance to the banning of books are our libraries. My wife is a retired school librarian. She got requests every year from parents who wanted a book to be banned, and she had a very simple answer: no.
Well, as an author of books for children and young adults, primarily, this conversation impacts our field significantly because one of the major targets of book banning is schools and what books can be kept in the school library, what books can be taught in a classroom, what books can be shared by teachers, and what information can be discussed with students of different ages and different regions around the country. And, I wish it was true that when a book gets banned, it actually sells more. But the fact of the matter is most books that get banned or challenged, actually, it does succeed in diminishing the awareness of those books, or it simply makes people afraid to buy them. Librarians are fighting significantly, as you said, to keep books on the shelves and to get books into classrooms. But, a lot of times they're risking their job when they do that. A teacher might be risking their job to get the right book in the hands of the right kid. And so that puts a lot of pressure on a lot of people. And so, certainly, since I was a kid, there were very few books, in the 80s and 90s that had kids like me on the cover, just regardless of what the book was about. I distinctly remember as a child my joy and excitement at finding Mildred D. Taylor's Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry on this rickety paperback rack in my middle school library, because when I turned that rack around, I saw this little girl who had black skin and black hair, and she was wearing a pink shirt and jeans overalls, and I was very into jeans overalls, okay? And they were in at the time, so just give me a break on that one. But she looked like me, and that, I didn't have the context at that time in that place to understand why it felt so powerful to me to see that girl on the book cover, but it was because it was one of the first times I had ever seen a kid who looked like me on the cover. I loved to read. I went to the library 2 times a week with my mom, and I picked up all kinds of books, but they were mostly about white kids, and I didn't really notice that lack in that time because I was finding stories I enjoyed. But as an adult, I can look back and know that moment was so powerful because I could see myself. And so in the decades since then, publishing has made efforts, librarians have made efforts, teachers have made efforts, authors have made efforts to get more diversity on our shelves, not just so kids can see themselves, but also so that kids can see each other, right, and understand different perspectives, to understand the world. And so, you know, when we start to take those diverse stories away, when we start to take those opportunities away, we are constricting what our kids have the opportunity to experience and explore and enjoy and understand. And schools are supposed to prepare kids for the real world. They're supposed to prepare us to go out and be good citizens. And one of the ways that we can do that is by understanding different points of view and different perspectives, and by really seeing our history and our culture through different lenses. And so it's an incredibly powerful experience to read a book, because you get to see the world through someone else's eyes. And if that person is always like you, then you're not learning as much as you could. You know, so for us, it's a really particular challenge to try to keep those books on the shelves and to try to keep our readers exposed to lots of different ideas. And so hopefully the work that we do, the work that humanities councils and libraries are doing all around the country is going to keep that diversity flowing and keep those voices available to all of us.
Thank you. It is so amazing to be here with all of you and to be with all these amazing authors. I totally feel like imposter syndrome, because these are like real authors, and I'm just like a doctor who happened to write a book, and like, but these are like legit amazing authors. So I wasn't supposed to write a book. Like, that wasn't my like life plan to be an author. And then I just kind of fell into one of the most emblematic, you know, environmental and public health crises of our time in Flint. And I didn't want to write a book. I refused for a long time. And by pure serendipity, I met my to-be editor at an event in Washington, D.C. And he came up to me. He's like, Mona, you need to write a book. And for everybody who had told me that for about a year that you need to write a book, I told them, like, go the F away. Like, there's no way I am writing a book. Like, I am so busy. Like, I just uncovered this water crisis. I've neglected my children, my family, my work. Like, I'm not writing a book. And then he told me who he was and who he represented. And he was part of Penguin Random House, which is a big publishing company. But he ran a unit of Penguin Random House called One World, which was all about social justice books. And it was only represented authors of color. And he told me about the other authors that he had helped bring to light, and they included folks like Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy, and Ta-Nehisi Coates, who wrote, obviously, Between the World and Me, and most recently, The Message. Trevor Noah and Imran Kendi, and the list went on and on of all these amazing people who have informed who I am and how I see the world. And that's how I got to write my book. And all of those other authors are on book ban lists right now. And I'm kind of jealous. Like, I want to be on a book ban list. Like, I'm going to check. I don't think I am yet. But, you know, all of these other authors who are part of kind of my family of books, have been banned. I'm sure some of you already read Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book, The Message, which has a whole section on book bans. And I think book bans happen as a reaction to, you know, we are a very reactive society. You know, Obama was elected, and then there was a reaction to that. You know, there's a lot of historians here. And I think book bans are a reaction to folks finally reading about history that they haven't read about, right? And starting to ask a lot of really important questions, like, well, why is it this way? And why didn't I learn about this? And why am I learning about this in books? And there's this active effort to kind of really silence that history. So I think it's awesome that we are that people are reacting to literature. And I see another kind of wave of kind of defiance and resistance, often led by, once again, our librarians and our humanity councils. I see librarians as part of this underground resistance. I love librarians who are going to continue to defend the word and that diverse word and that diverse literature, so that we do have continued access to these important works.
I tried to get banned. I wrote 7 books, and I keep thinking, this one, I'm going to get lynched for this one. No. Banning a book, it seems to me, is akin to having to an amputation. it takes away from the cultural body in a way that maybe it doesn't kill you to lose one finger, but then another and another and another. And each time somebody's work is singled out and banned, yes, sometimes it helps with sales, but it's an act of violence, I think. It's saying that what you wrote about and the characters that you wrote about and the experiences you wrote about are beyond the pale and should be hidden away. And there's been too much of that for way too long. So that's all I have.
I'd like to talk about soft bans. So my book, Firekeeper's Daughter, has been soft banned in one school district 20 miles away from where I grew up and where I now live. We used to play them in sports, Brandywine, and 2 librarians wrote a grant application to a nonprofit organization called We Need Diverse Books. And they received a grant which included over $3,000 worth of free books, 172 titles of books by diverse authors telling diverse stories. And the school board president said, "Who gave you permission to write that grant?" And ordered that those boxes not be shelved. That is a soft ban. My book is one of the 172 titles that, as far as I know, is still in a box and not on a library shelf in a school that we used to play sports against. And where I grew up, I was 18 before I even read a book that had a Native main character and saw myself reflected in the pages of a book. And so to have written a story that I'm so proud of, and to know that it's in a box and not on a shelf, soft banning is something you need to be aware of. And of course, parents have every right to say, I don't want my child to see this book, but how dare you answer for other parents' children and dictate what those children should have access to.
I think if you've listened to the first round of questions, you're probably coming to a realization what an incredible group of authors this is. I got to spend time with them in the green room, and it was a hoot.
There was wine.
It was wine. But there wasn't dancing, so we were really pleased with
And it
Steve.
wasn't green.
The next question is going to be a little bit easier. A question many readers and potential writers have is, what are your earliest recollections of wanting to be a writer? I mean, did it happen when you were 3, 4, or with Dr. Mona? Never. You can also include experiences like writing in a diary or a journal or even the back of a napkin, which I know some writers, that was their first writing. So what kind of role also did teachers, parents, librarians set you in that course? How did you become a storyteller? That's the essence of the question. So, Beth?
This one is easy for me because when I started reading, I started writing, basically. And I think that happens to a lot of writers, which is we read so much, we get this notion that, oh, this is so fun to read. Maybe I should do this. And thus, we are set down a very sad path of lifetime struggle and anxiety. For me, that started around age 5, and at first I thought it was fun because I didn't actually think it was something I could do. I thought it was just for fun. And I never thought it was a career. I didn't connect it. I would read the writers I loved. I would read, all those Ramona Quimby books. And then I would read. I was really into British literature when I was young. I didn't understand it at all, but I would read it, trying to understand it, and I didn't think that I could actually write anything, but I loved to read. And then it really wasn't until I got into college and had professors who were like, you can do this. And I was like, really? I don't think so. I never had read any stories or novels about Asian people, basically. But in college I did, and it changed everything for me. I literally said, wait a minute, you can do this? And I started reading more and got a lot of direction from librarians and teachers and professors over the years. To me, getting recommendations, going to a physical place, looking for books, that is so much more important than asking an algorithm. We actually don't know what to read. And that's the whole point, is that we need other people to give us suggestions and ideas. Organizations, librarians, people we know and love, to give us ideas like, you might like this, or try something completely different and read that instead. There's only good to be gained from reading a huge variety. And that's really what I did when I was young, and then realized, okay, maybe I will try this, and thus, contributed myself to this lifetime of struggle and anxiety. But I enjoy it because I get to be up here with all of you.
I am so glad you brought up the anxiety bit. It's what you really want to hang out with people for. They help you with your own anxieties. So I have a really simple answer to this. Mr. Michon. Okay, I'll explain. So like you, Beth, I loved to read as a kid. The librarians at this public library I mentioned a minute ago were fundamentally important. My family was fundamentally important. I loved comic books. My parents were great about it. My father's principle was, as long as you're reading something, that's great. Lots of comic books. But Mr. Michon was my 6th grade English teacher. And up to that point, English class had been, diagramming sentences or trying to remember which one was the verb. And what he did, he was a very young teacher. Now looking back on it, it was probably his first job, and he was trying to be creative in a way that my school wasn't. And he encouraged us to write. And I just fell in love with doing that. And I'm sure it was awful, and it didn't matter. It was suddenly this kind of outlet of creativity that I had never really imagined before. And once that, I think, Beth, you're saying the same thing, once that's in your blood, man, that is really hard to get away from. So I think if I have to credit one person, it's Mr. Michon. I have, in fact, if any of you know him, please let him know. I've actually Googled him over the years trying to find him, and I've never been able to do it. And I think it speaks to the power of teaching. And it speaks to the power that teachers give their students and often never ever realize what they've done.
So I have looked at some of the writing I did when I was young, and I would say he shouldn't go into writing. Like any good journalist who knows how to ask questions, I'm going to change the question, which is not when did I know I wanted to be a writer, but when did I know I wanted to tell stories? And I'm going to point out 2 things. So when I was 11 years old, you can imagine this, my brother, who was at the University of Michigan, invited me up for the weekend and then promptly abandoned me because what do you want an 11-year-old kid around? And I went off to the library, and I, for the entire afternoon, put in reel after reel of famous dates in history to see how the newspapers had covered them. And I wanted to tell those stories. And then when I was in high school, I read a book, which I recommend to any of you here, by a journalist, Anthony Lewis, called Gideon's Trumpet. It is the story of how people who are indigent end up with lawyers, how we have a public defender service. Gideon was in that category. And it's just one Supreme Court case and how it came to be, how it went from Florida all the way to the Supreme Court. And I said, I want to tell a story like that someday. And that's why I wrote the book Separate, which is about Plessy versus Ferguson.
I didn't know I wanted to be a writer until I was in my early 20s, but there is a difference between knowing you want to be a writer and being able to call yourself a writer and actually writing. And so I've been actually writing since I was a kid, but I never thought of that as something I could do. I didn't even really connect the idea that the name on the book cover is a person, right? That's a person living a life somewhere, right? I knew that the Babysitter's Club was by Anne M. Martin, but like I didn't really think Anne M. Martin is a person who's having coffee in the morning and like going to the grocery store and stuff like that, right? She seemed like a mythical character, just like the babysitters in the Babysitter's Club. And so even though I had a notebook under my pillow all the time, and even though I was always writing poems on every scrap of paper that you can find, it never ever occurred to me that I could be a writer. Even when I was getting ready to graduate from high school and I was stressed as heck and I didn't know what to do with myself, I sat down and in a week and a half, I wrote like an 80-page novel. It was a novella, really. But 80 pages when you're in high school is like a pretty significant thing, right? And yet, even having done that, I didn't know that I wanted to be a writer. It wasn't until I graduated from college and I was living in New York City and I didn't have any friends and I was trying to figure out the world. And once again, I was in a time of like stress and confusion, right? Just like right before I went off to college. And I found myself rushing home from work every night to work on my stories. And I finally thought, you know what? I'm spending a lot of time on this writing thing. Maybe I should like try to figure out how to do something with it. And so that's how I ended up going to grad school and getting a Master of Fine Arts in writing. And I don't know if I would have made it to that choice if not for one teacher, Professor Harkins in college. After I had decided not to be pre-med, I took an African American literature class, and she had us, reading essays, reading books and writing essays about them. And she also had us writing personal narratives about memories from our own life. And so I had written this 3-page narrative memory about an experience I had with my grandfather, actually in Ypsilanti, Michigan, years ago. And that story must have sparked something for her, because like she wrote in the margins of my essay, "Keep writing, your narratives are important." And I remember feeling so like, my narratives, like I have narratives, like that felt so like, ooh, yeah. Like I was like, I have narratives. Like I didn't know I had narratives. And she was the sort of person who would use a word like narrative in casual conversation. But that's something in that. And even I wasn't ready yet, right, to accept what that might mean for my life. But I always like held on to that little note and that little compliment. And she's somebody who's followed my career through, the last 20 years and has been really, really supportive all along.
That's beautiful.
Let's change it just for a second. Is writing a children's book more difficult than writing adult fiction?
I mean, I haven't written adult fiction except for that 80-page novella in high school. I have dabbled. I think that I think writing anything is difficult. I think the challenge of writing for children, the particular challenge of writing for children, is that you can't get away with, pulling any punches. You can't get away with, shoveling anything right at them. You got to be true. You got to be honest. You can write fiction, but there has to be something deeply true in it. And you have to be incredibly straightforward all of the time. You can't just throw some beautiful language at people and expect them to enjoy it. Like there has to be so much going on, right? There are beautiful adult novels where not a lot happens, but it's just somebody's really good at, writing a beautiful sentence, right? And you can't get away with that in children's literature. You have to have characters, you have to have a story, you have to be going somewhere with that story, and it all has to make sense at every single sentence.
It has to have a narrative.
It has to have, thank you. It has to have a narrative. So I think writing anything is challenging, but I do think there's a particular, some particular things that you have to pursue in order to write for children, and really understanding that kids need truth just as much as anybody, and that they will see through anything false, and adults don't always see through anything false. So you can get away with a little more in adult writing, I think, than you can get away with in children's literature.
As a pediatrician, I completely agree. Kids see everything and they know everything. So when I was a kid, I also grew up in my local library. I grew up in Royal Oak, Michigan. So I remember going in the basement. I still remember the smell of the microfiche machines in the basement. So like for my family, like Kevin mentioned others, like, books were kind of the religion of the family. Like you read, and I read, and I to this day consume books. I think I read about a book a week, all kinds of different genres. That is my go-to. People often ask me like, why are you the kind of doctor you are? Like, why do you care? I'm like, because of literature. Like literature and the humanities have literally enabled me to step inside the shoes of others, right? And feel and care. And I think for me as a physician, it was literature that single-handedly has made me who I am. So when I was, yay literature, yay humanities. So I wanted to be a journalist when I was a kid. So I wanted to write. I was the editor of our high school paper. I went to college. I took a creative writing class, and I was so fortunate. I had the actual professor and not the TA. And I stuck with her. I took creative writing throughout college, even though I knew I wanted to go into medicine. So writing was always part of kind of my life, and is important for every discipline that you go into. And then when I did commit to writing that book, when I met my editor and I did finally agree to write a book, I had already written about 300 pages in a journal. So to this day, I continue to journal. So there was a lot of content already there. It was a mess. It was a jumbled mess. But there was quite a bit of content there that was ready. So I credit teachers, my high school English teacher, Mrs. Bennett, who came to some of my Great Michigan Read events, my professor in college, Professor Back, who I continue to keep in touch with. So all of us, we stand on the shoulders of our giants, be it from our family or teachers who kind of have got us to this point and really enabled us to love literature and love writing.
Okay, I came from a completely different direction. There were no readers in my family. I was a passionate reader who would read the backs of cereal boxes and bleach bottles in the bathroom. If it stood, I would read it. And nobody else was like that in my family. But I had an aunt who was married to an Air Force pilot, and he was stationed in Anchorage in 1964. And you don't remember that for any reason at all, right? The largest, most violent earthquake in North American history, a 9.3 earthquake, right down the middle of Anchorage. And my Aunt Mary was a writer. She was a letter writer. We don't see that anymore. People don't write letters. I don't write letters. Everything is done with my thumbs. She wrote what it was like. She told the story of what it was like to be there during that experience. And I still have that letter. And I also, the one line, I remember reading it, but the one line that jumped out at me, which I remember to this day, was her talking about her husband. And where was Dick? Dick was in the air, fat, dumb, and happy. Which tells you a lot about that marriage, I'm just saying. So the idea, that kind of gave me something that years later, because I'm an anthropologist, I'm a biological anthropologist by training. I did not have I was never in a writing group, I didn't take a literature course, it was all like science. Although Miss Shanklin in freshman year of high school did teach me how to diagram sentences, and I am very grateful. Everything I've done since that day is based on what she taught me. So I made her a character in one of my books. But yeah, it's to tell a story and to have that kind of, you're going along in one direction and then you fake left and you go right. It was that sudden change of tone stuck with me. That the power of being able to do that with words. So it's my Aunt Mary that made a writer out of me.
To me, a story is always about a spark and a question. And when I was a senior in high school in New Buffalo, Michigan, My best friend attended a school nearby, and senior year, she said there was a new boy in all of her classes that she thought might be my type. My type, I would say, was a beefy intellectual. It is a unicorn that has eluded me these many. Anyway, I was dateless and intrigued, and I would continue to ask about this new boy. And then a few weeks into the school year, she said, no, he's really not your type. He doesn't play football. And he hangs out with the really hardcore stoners. And so I never met him. And a month before graduation, she tells me, you're never going to believe it. There was a drug bust in their town, and it turned out that the new boy was actually an undercover police officer. And not to date myself, however, those are the only dates I do get these days, are the original 21 Jump Street still had not, it was like 2 years away. So the idea that a young-looking law enforcement officer could pose as a high school student as part of an undercover investigation intrigued the hell out of me. And I remembered thinking, what if we would have met? What if we liked each other? Or maybe, what if he didn't like me, but he needed my help somehow? And then the spark of an idea that led to this question of why would some undercover drug investigation need the help of an ordinary 18-year-old Ojibwe girl? And my friends, 36 years later, it hit the New York Times bestseller list as Firekeeper's Daughter, which I pitched my debut as Indigenous Nancy Drew meets 21 Jump Street. So for me, writing, I didn't study creative writing. I just had this idea for a story, and didn't pursue creative writing in college. But I was 44 years old and probably, going through a midlife crisis and realizing maybe there was an equal amount, best case scenario, sand in the bottom of the hourglass and the top of the hourglass. And if I hadn't accomplished the things I always said I wanted to do with my life, what was I waiting for? And I decided I would rather write the world's most horrible draft of a story than to live with the regret of always wondering what would have happened if I would have written that story. That has been on my mind since I was 18 years old. And so one morning, I was 44, I woke up a half hour before the kids, and I sat in front of the family computer with a cup of coffee, and I wrote for a half hour, and that's how it started.
Thank you, Angeline. I think some of these stories you're probably finding are pretty inspirational of how you become a writer. There's no direct single path to do that at all.
Put your hands on the keyboard and make some prose happen. It will suck. Fix it tomorrow and get a little further.
So do it. One of the things that one of the authors brought up that I think any author is having, second thoughts about is the loss of letters. We really are not writing letters anymore, and no one really. Do you think people are really going to save their email? And it's not going to happen.
But I have boxes of our letters. Mary Dewing and I wrote to each other for like 30 years, and I kept all those letters.
So letters are a lost art, and I think they may come back, but I don't know when. So let's go to question 4. As I reread all these books, several themes emerged, and I think reading them in their entirety helped me see these themes that I wouldn't have seen individually necessarily. but distilling them down that's part of the genius of being an author. There's fiction, nonfiction, memoir, historical fiction, memory thriller, and they all to me seem to revolve around empathy. And especially, I think that came to my attention because the difficult world we live in now. And to better understand human experience, how do we do that? We do that through literature, even though it may be uncomfortable, troubling, challenging, and just sort of the antithesis sometimes of who we are. I'd like each author to comment on how their writing gets the reader to think about empathy, even though they don't know they're thinking about it, and how sharing those individual and community stories build greater understanding between us. So, Beth?
I like how I always have to begin here. Jeez, they did not tell me this when. Empathy is integral to the reading experience, and a principal reason why we have to actually keep reading and not just scrolling. I do not think scrolling creates empathy. It creates doom. That's what we call doom scrolling, but it does not create empathy, because we actually need to immerse into another world and perspective for a while in order to feel that. You know, when I'm writing, I never think about that when I'm writing. I only think about it much later when it becomes a text and when I encounter another work that is a text and becoming a part of somebody else's experience. You know, I grew up reading mostly white literature. That's what we read back then. And I identified with all of these characters who, it doesn't make any sense why I would identify with any of them. Like, why would I identify with Elizabeth Bennet? That is truly ridiculous, you know. But I did. And I don't think it's a stretch at all for the opposite to happen, for someone like Elizabeth Bennet to identify with me, because it's the human experience. It's just that not everybody gets that chance or the opportunity or even is willing to try it. But that's what I think we have to do, is try it and see what we're capable of feeling and doing.
So I'm a historian. I write nonfiction. I write about the past. For me, I think what I try to do, I can't claim I pull it off, but what I hope I'm able to do is think about empathy kind of on two levels for me. One is to empathize with the people of the past, to appreciate and I'm an academic historian. It's really a bad pitch for you to ever read the book.
An amazing book. Read his books.
That I want a reader to realize that people in the past were as complicated as we are, as contradictory as we are, as interesting as we are, and that they grappled, and this is the second level, and that in the past, people grappled with profound questions of justice, of how they wanted the world to look, how they thought the world ought to be when it wasn't, and the enormous costs that the pursuit of that justice can impose and did impose on ordinary people. I didn't really want to write an awful lot of history. I have nothing against writing histories of major figures. I've done some of that. What I really wanted to do was write history of ordinary people struggling to make the world a better place, and not always succeeding in that. And again, sometimes paying terrible prices for the struggles they did. And I guess if I want readers to walk away with one thing from those stories, it's the complexity and value of that struggle.
When I started to write Annie's Ghost, which is a story about my mother being a liar, I had to make a decision, and some editors in New York who read my book proposal did not understand why I wanted to write it as a first-person story. And the reason is I wanted to make it universal, and I thought the way to make that universal, that is the story of family secrets, was to walk in the same shoes that a reader would need to walk in while reading the book, and that I could talk to the reader more easily that way. I couldn't, though, avoid the problem, which is that I was both the investigator, the journalist trying to find out why my mother kept secret the existence of a sister, but I was also her son, and I wanted to understand, not judge her. So I wasn't trying, I mean, empathy is one of the many, many emotions that I think that we bring to literature of any kind. I wanted to bring all the emotions. I wanted to feel what she felt. I wanted to understand why she would do something that would, my mother was really good at getting you to like her, and so it would not earn her points for you to know that she was hiding the existence of a sister. So what drove her to do that? And as Angelina said, there's that spark, that question that was always driving me. And I think that if I could feel empathy, that I didn't think about it this way, but I was hoping that readers would feel my empathy too, and they could bring their own emotions to the story.
So a little over 10 years ago, Ilyasa Shabazz approached me about the prospect of writing a novel with her about her father, Malcolm X, which became my Great Michigan Read title, X, a Novel. And at the time, I had a couple of novels that I had written, some of which dealt with civil rights and social justice topics, where she felt, oh, this is a person who, could work with me on, telling a story about my father that hasn't been told in this way before. And so, for me to be approached by Malcolm X's daughter to write a book about Malcolm, I was like, okay, I am awesome, this is great, how, somebody finally, recognizes that I've got something to say. She's asking me to work with her on this first-person novel, from the perspective of Malcolm X, and so, I'll be writing, from the first-person perspective of Malcolm X, I will be writing from the first-person perspective of Malcolm X, the world-renowned speaker and leader and humanitarian, one of the most famous humans, in the world, I will be what? And so, this glorious moment of I've been chosen was immediately followed by this moment of horror and imposter syndrome and all of this I can't. How could I Malcolm X? Me? Be Malcolm X? No. And, and Ilyasa very gently, I'd already said yes, because of course, but I was panicking. And so I met with Ilyasa and we were talking about her father. We were talking about the story that she wanted to tell. And I said something gosh, he was this amazing writer and speaker. His words are being remembered years after his death and are still relevant to our world. He articulated something so powerful that spoke to so many people. I don't know, I think I'm good, I'm confident, but I also don't know if I can be that good. And she goes, no. You need to remember that we're not writing from the perspective of Malcolm X, the world-renowned speaker and leader and preacher and humanitarian, beloved by millions. We're writing about Malcolm Little, the 14-year-old boy from Lansing, Michigan, who is lost and scared and confused and making a lot of bad decisions about his life because he doesn't think he's going to amount to anything because that's what the world is telling him. And that's the story we're going to tell. And I was like, oh, okay, lost, scared, confused, worthless. I can do that. I can write that. No problem. Right? And so, for me, that was a little bit of a moment of relief because I thought, okay, I have a way to enter this story. But for my reader, what I've learned, right, is that the same way that she encouraged me to be able to enter that story and do the thing that I wasn't sure that I had the skills or ability to pull off, that is the same experience that my readers have when they come to read X, a Novel, because everybody has had the experience of feeling small and lost and scared and you don't know what's next. And maybe you have a dream or a goal or an idea, but you don't know what the steps are to get there, or you don't think you can do it, or you're worried, right? Or you feel too small. And so, when I talk to young readers, teens, and anybody about this book, I'm thinking, when you enter this book, right, you do empathize with young Malcolm. You empathize with that kid who's trying to figure out his life. And all he had to do to become Malcolm X was to decide that he wants to be somebody who takes the right steps. He wants to be somebody who makes a difference. He wants to be somebody, who's working for good. He didn't know that he could become the thing that he became. He didn't know that he was going to be a famous speaker and preacher. He didn't know that people were going to make films and write books about him years after his death. Like, he didn't know. All he knew was that he wanted to be somebody who made a difference, and he had goals, and he went after them step by step. And so, the idea that this is a character that I can empathize with, who did something amazing with his life, is actually really powerful, because none of us know what's possible for ourselves. Like, I was that little kid who was scribbling in my notebook under my pillow, but didn't dare to call myself a writer, didn't know that that was possible. But I just kept scribbling under my pillow. And then one day I was like, oh, maybe I will do something with this. But I had already laid the groundwork, right? It's all those little steps, those little day-by-day steps. And so I think sometimes fiction or nonfiction, like whatever we read that does draw us in and gives us a connection, it can not only help us feel and connect with those characters themselves, but it can help us see ourselves in new ways or help us see our own potential in a new light. And so I think that empathy is the most powerful thing about writing, both for our experience as authors, but also for the experience of the readers and what it gives to them to enhance just who they are and how they see themselves.
That's beautiful. So, like I said earlier, like I am the doctor I am because of literature, and it is the empathy I have gained from reading books, especially first-person narrative books. And so when it came to deciding how I was going to share this story, I was deliberate that I also wanted to write a first-person book. I wanted folks to literally be in my shoes and go through that roller coaster of emotions that I was going through. The recognition that there might be something wrong with the water, the disbelief, the anger, the frustration, the madness, like, this can't be, there's no way. We live in Michigan, we're surrounded by the Great Lakes, there's no way that in the richest country in the history of the world, we've just put lead, we have lead in the water and we're poisoning our entire population. So I wanted folks to be mad with me. I wanted folks to cry with me. I wanted folks to stay up with me all night and lose weight with me and be angry with me to try to figure out this mystery that was happening. So I absolutely wanted to garner the empathy of emotion, of the emotion of empathy in this, very first-person dramatic kind of what I hoped was a page-turning narrative in the discovery of this work. And it was once again layered with emotions, the hope, and then the action, and then the science, and then the backlash, feeling this big, feeling vulnerable, second-guessing myself, and then kind of moving on and doing this work together. So it was also being able to kind of, I think, expose that vulnerability. Like, can I do this? This is hard. Can I live with myself if I didn't do that? So really kind of exposing all those emotions so folks can see, like, hey, like, she's not this like really special person out there. She's just like me. She's also trying to, there's personal in there. There's life about me as a mom and a wife and my work and juggling a bazillion balls in the air and having them all fall, right? Because I am just like you, trying to juggle a bazillion balls in the air. And if I can do this, then you can do this. So there's also that kind of hope of relatability. So the title of my book is What the Eyes Don't See. And I think that was one of the hardest parts of writing a book. There were so many hard parts about writing a book, harder than medical school, but it was really hard. But I think the hardest part was choosing a title. And this title also is about empathy. It means many things. It means the very literal, like, we don't see lead in water and we don't see the effects of lead. But it's about this blindness that we have to certain people and places and problems, right? This indifference. The nation, the state turned its eye on Flint and Flint's kids, right? And that's not unlike what we do to so many injustices. We close our eyes to them. And what I hope that the story would convey is that we should care. We should care about Flint kids just as we care about our own kids. So that was, I think, by and large, the singular mission of this book, is to garner empathy. And when readers come up to me and say, oh, I was angry with you, and I cried with you, and I was happy with you. And for me, when I hear that, I'm like, yes, I won. That was what I wanted to accomplish. I wanted folks to feel. I wanted folks to care.
I hide in the characters. I don't write first person. I've written about Jesuit priests from the inside. I've written about people who ran copper countries in the UP. It's not my life is just so boring and wonderful. I've been married for 54 years in a row. To the same man, and I'm a suburban housewife, and but I have always read history and biography and autobiography. I don't read much fiction. I read those things, and I'm constantly fascinated by other people's lives and what they saw. I seem to be drawn to people that I feel are unfairly maligned. Doc Holliday, for example. I want to see how they saw it from their point of view. And to do that, my empathy is more of a tool than anything else. It's a writer's tool for me. I go back to their childhood. I want to know, what war did their father fight in? Because there's always a war the father fought in. And how did that affect the sons? How did that affect the daughters? What's the political milieu that they grew up in, whether it's 1850 or 1939 or all of the 1913, all of the different historical eras that I've worked in. It seems to me that by 14, you've experienced things that you will either have to spend your life pushing away from, repairing the damage. You know, can you do that? Can you repair that damage, or do you wander in the wreckage for the rest of your life? Or have you somehow gotten a solid foundation that you can push off of and go a little further? I'm one of those lucky ones who had a good childhood. But I can see how easily that could have been different. And so, to me, that's what I'm trying to do, is to experience other people's lives through the writing and then convey that story to other people, to fairly and compassionately share the story of people who weren't able to share it themselves.
James Joyce wrote that in the particular we find the universal. And with Firekeeper's Daughter, I set out to write the story that I wished I could have read as a teen that might have helped me make sense of, you know, having an Ojibwe dad and a non-Native mom and a non-Native grandma that didn't care for Native Americans but told me that she loved me. But I knew that she didn't love Native Americans, and grappling with my identity. And so, empathy. Firekeeper's Daughter, I'm very fortunate. I have received 22 foreign rights deals. My story about this very particular Ojibwe girl, 18-year-old Ojibwe girl in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, that it's being translated and published around the world. And I wrote Donis to kind of be an amalgam of the major cultural influences in Sault Ste. Marie. So her father is Ojibwe, and her mother comes from, French fur traders, and her grandfather, like Italian stonecutters, and she fractionates her identity. She's got her native identity and her non-native identity. She's got hockey world, science world, all these different things where she code switches to survive based on whatever room she's in. And the story I wanted to tell was that it's not until she embraces all of the facets of her identity that she really comes into her strength. And that was my hope for Sault Ste. Marie and for communities, is that it's only until we see the strengths and assets of all of these cultural influences on a place and truly appreciate, that's when we're at our strongest. And so, yeah, that was kind of the thinking behind my story at that level.
That wasn't an editorial comment. I just had to sneeze.
We're going to have a final question. A lot of these questions have been integrated from the audience questions that they provided, so I'm not asking them specific questions because they mostly talked about the things. They're a beautiful group of authors to talk with. But one of the things when they got the phone call, you know, what did you think when you got a phone call and they said, we'd like you to be part of the Great Michigan Read Program? You went, what am I getting myself into? And the question I have is, how did the Great Michigan Read experience impact you? And what was the experience like during your time as a Great Michigan Read author? And I'd like to start with Angeline, because we're going to, the worst.
I was so ready.
Yeah, well, not. So, please.
To me, when I found out that I was selected as the Great Michigan Read, I was just proud as, you know, that Ojibwe girl, and knowing that my story would reach so many of like former students and current, you know, teens, and so I just felt like honored that a story about an ordinary 18-year-old Ojibwe girl who is a whiz at chemistry, but also knows about traditional Ojibwe medicines and knows her culture and language, and is also a badass hockey player, that, like, you know, that's the heroine that people would be reading about. And I just felt really proud to represent Indigenous literature so specific to Michigan. It's been an honor, and what I so appreciate during my time as the most recent Great Michigan Read author, so many communities wanted me to come and talk, and what I appreciate is that the Michigan Humanities, they didn't pick the biggest cities. They picked the cities that maybe never, ever could have afforded to bring an author in. And so, you know, we were in some communities that, you know, were tiny and out of the way. And I know even Beaver Island was like one of the contenders to have. And it was, that's what I appreciate about the Great Michigan Reads, is that they really set out to bring authors to communities, telling Michigan stories and sharing those experiences with Michigan residents. And I've just had the most phenomenal past 2 years going around Michigan and meeting people, and forever thankful. Miigwech. Thank you.
I was horrified. I'm sorry, it's true. I'm usually not allowed out of the house. That's okay. Yeah, I mean, I had just retired. I had drawn a hard line underneath my whole writing career. I was done. And I was doing watercolors, you know, and spoiling the dog and pottering in the garden with my husband and having a lovely life. And then they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And I am grateful. It was wonderful. It took a book that I knew when I was writing it. I said, this is the last one. I don't have the drive and really the cognitive capacity, I'll be honest with you. It's hard. It's hard to write a novel. And it takes me 3 to 5 years when I'm at the top of my game, and I'm not anymore. So I knew that was going to be my last novel. And it was about a mining strike in Calumet, Michigan. I mean, it's back and beyond, and nobody's ever heard about it. And most people think that the Upper Peninsula is part of Canada, right? So it was a long way away, but it was like, okay, yeah, I will do this, and let's get this novel noticed, because I wanted people to know the story of Annie Clements, a 25-year-old girl who led a miners' strike. How did that happen? It was such a wonderful opportunity to do. We called it my farewell tour. My husband drove. We took the dog. And it was a wonderful experience. So yeah, it was. My first response was, "Oh, don't do this to me," and then I said, "Yes, okay." So.
Beautiful. So it was joyful. It was amazing. I think we got to go to every Michigan county, if not in person. COVID hit the middle of my Great Michigan Read experience, so we got to do a lot of sessions over Zoom. And I think what I came away with is that how people all over this great state care. People care. They really do care. That goal of this book was to get people to care. And whatever little community I went to, whatever library, whatever amazing book club, people cared. And that just filled my heart with goodness. It was lovely to, once again, traverse the state. So my book starts with the opening scene is in Traverse City. I was a little girl, got in a car accident as we were driving from Detroit to where we lived in the Upper Peninsula in Houghton, Michigan. So there's a scene in Traverse City. There's scenes in the UP. There's scenes in Metro Detroit where I grew up. There's scenes in Ann Arbor and East Lansing where I went to school. So this is a Michigan book. It's also a book about an Arab American immigrant, and which is what we have a lot of in Michigan too. So that was wonderful to be able to kind of share that story and that perspective, which is very much a Michigan story. And then obviously it was a story about this big thing that happened in Michigan, right? But not so much a story of a crisis, this terrible crime that was committed against some of the most vulnerable people in our country, our children. But it was this amazing story of resistance, right? This story of refusing to accept the status quo and of fighting back in a very collective way, which Flint does really well. So I was also able to share some amazing Flint stories. One of them is a story of a woman named Janora Dollinger Johnson, this young activist who was part of the UAW Great Sit-Down Strike in the 1930s. So it was also a tribute to some really great Michigan history. So it was amazing and joyful and beautiful to be able to share that story throughout the state, this really kind of quintessential, I think, Michigan story to so many other Michiganders who were so receptive and warm.
So I shared my Great Michigan Read experience with Ilyasa, who is the co-author of the book, and I suspect that Ilyasa got to do the lion's share of the events and the touring, but I did get to come for 2 separate tours during our time, and mostly I got to visit with students at schools and some libraries, where I got to share with them the story that I shared with you about Malcolm, about my insecurity about writing from his viewpoint, and seeing myself in a new way because of thinking about his story in that way. And so it was really joyful to be able to go, throughout the state and to meet young readers, especially teenage kids, even right here in Lansing, who, are like, oh, I understand who Malcolm is. Like, he's this lost, scared, confused 14-year-old kid from Lansing. Like, I know what that looks like. And to be able to empathize with that person and then to see, like, whoa, he became Malcolm X. What could I be? Right, and to see them making that little realization in their mind is such a powerful experience. all over the country, but especially here, just because, there's such a profound connection to him here, and it is, his own roots are here. And for me, one of the extra benefits is just getting to come back to Michigan. I mean, I was born here. I lived here for several years as a child. My grandparents lived here throughout my childhood. So we were constantly coming back and visiting, even though my family had moved to Indiana. And so being in Michigan reminds me of some of the best times of my life. It reminds me of childhood and reminds me of some of those joyful connections with grandparents. And, even that, enriches my ability to share Malcolm's story, because for him, Michigan was his roots too. Even when he moved to New York and moved to Boston, like, he would come back a few times to, as a teen. Obviously, he lived in Detroit as well when he was an adult, but he would come back because those connections were here and because they were so deep. And, for me, this is the superficial part of my answer, is that whenever I'm in central Michigan, I got to get some Superman ice cream. So that no matter where they took me on my Michigan tour during the Great Michigan Read, I got a scoop of Superman every day. And that's a good week when you get a scoop of Superman every day.
So this is very definitely an offer with strings attached. You get the call and you feel so good, and they say, do you have the time to go all around the state of Michigan? And I'm wondering, how many authors rejected this offer before you got to me? A little humbling, It's a gift. I mean, it's truly a gift. And it's a gift to the author because what do authors really want? They want readers. And they want to meet readers. They want to talk to readers. Not all authors. Some people aren't comfortable doing that. But any writer who says to you, I write for myself and I put the manuscript in the drawer and I'm done, is a liar. We all write to be read. And here you have a chance to meet people from all over the state that I grew up in. I'm doing your business here. And I want to tell you about one moment that happened during my tour in Traverse City, where I spoke at the National Writers Series that Doug Stanton and his wife run. And they have a program called Front Street Writers. It's 25 high school kids each year, I think it is, or maybe it's each semester, and they get taught about writing, and you're asked to speak to them. And one of the 25 writers was a young woman with a severe disability from cerebral palsy. My aunt, in the story of Annie's Ghost, the secret aunt, had physical and mental health issues. And Nicole took over most of the kids didn't seem like they were all that interested. I didn't need them. I had Nicole, and Nicole was asking question after question in a very halting, very difficult for her to speak, but she was persistent, she was alive, she was the star of the show. Afterwards, she met with me and she handed me a poem that she had written. And she said, I wanted to show you this. And I took it home and I read it when I had some time. And I wrote to her and I said, would you give me permission to read your poem aloud at the next Great Michigan Read event? And I'm not asking you that because I want to honor somebody who has a disability. You're a poet, and I want to read your poetry. That's the gift that I got from the Great Michigan Read.
Okay, so I want to go back to the way we started over here, because that's really that's an amazing story, and I don't think I can match that at all. My experience on the Michigan Read was somewhat different than yours. I think just because of the difference in the books, I met lots and lots of adult audiences. And most of the talks that I did and most of the presentations traveling around the state, which was wonderful and was really exciting, they were to adults. And that's really pretty easy. And then I got to Flint. And what happened in Flint was the organizers, they said, I think we'll change it up. We've got a group of middle schoolers for you. Yeah. And I mean, because I just thought to myself, shit.
We had a bet on who'd say shit first.
And I won. And it was obviously it was an afternoon event. I don't even remember where it was in Flint. And oh my God, I had never had so much fun in a session talking to people about the book before. You know, and it's not a cheery story. It is not a happy, easy story. But of course, kids don't expect stories to be happy and easy. But they were willing to embrace the hard parts and push on the hard parts. And I don't think I have ever had in my time, certainly in the Michigan Read, and I think many, you know, in all the various talks you end up doing over the years, I don't know if I ever had a more exciting hour and a half than I had with those kids in Flint.
Okay, so I grew up in Grand Rapids. And I grew up there, yes, represented, yeah, there we go, yeah. And I grew up there because my family and I were resettled there as refugees after the war in Vietnam. So I grew up Vietnamese, but I also grew up, you know, very American, very Midwestern. And I feel very much like a Michigander. We were very Michigan. You know, we drank a lot of Vernors. You know. The amount of time that my siblings and I spent collecting pop cans to return to Myers for the 10-cent deposits, you know, that really adds up. That was most of our childhood. And so I wrote about that in the book for the Great Michigan Read, Stealing Buddha's Dinner. And I felt so Michigan, and I felt so Midwestern. I still do. But I realized as, you know, going through life that that's not how people see me. They always just see me as Asian. And people are always surprised when I say I'm a real Midwesterner. And so one of my secret goals and hopes is that one day that will change, and that the default idea of what a Midwesterner is or looks like will be more expansive, and to include someone like me. So when I got this news about the Great Michigan Read, I was so excited. I was like, yes, the first step toward that. And I loved it. We went to all sorts of places. And I wanted to tell you one quick story, which is that I had done a book event in Traverse City, and I was driving to Alpena for the next book event. And apparently was driving too fast. And I got pulled over. And I said, I'm sorry, officer, but I have to get to this book event in Alpena for the Great Michigan Read. And he said, what's that? And I had all the materials right there. And I showed him. I was like, this is what it is. I had like pamphlets. It was all printed out. I had my book, and we actually spent a rather pleasant time discussing the Great Michigan Read, you know, in my book. And he was like, wow, this is it. He was like, I had never heard of this. He learned something that day. He did. And I did not get a ticket.
Well, thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to Bill, our author, our amazing ASL interpreter, Audrey Morris. Thank you so much. That's right. We're going to get you ready for your book signing. We cannot wait to share our 10th Great Michigan Read title with you tonight. I know, right? You're like the first people in the whole state that are going to know this secret. So, how lucky. But I'm not going to do the honors. I am going to let our next Great Michigan Read author do the honors.
Hey everyone, my name is Curtis Chin, and I'm the author of the new memoir, Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. It's my memoir about growing up in Detroit during the 80s, a very difficult time period for my hometown. You had the struggling auto industry, crack cocaine, AIDS. I knew 5 people murdered by the time I was 18. Despite that, I felt like I had the best childhood ever. That's because my family had this wonderful Chinese restaurant called Chung's right in the heart of the Cass Corridor on the corner of Cass and Peterborough. And it's where I learned all the life lessons I needed to get on with a great life that I've had. And so for me, writing this book wasn't just about like recapturing all those fun moments, you know, and all that Chinese food. but it was also just a thank you letter to my parents for providing me with this wonderful, all these wonderful opportunities. And also, you know, a hat tip to my hometown of Detroit, because, you know, I really wanted people to sort of see this other side, you know, because you know, a lot of times people say negative things, and I wanted to show that it really was a great place to grow up, and I'm very proud to be a Detroiter. And so that is the book, and I know I'm going to be going out on tour all throughout the state as part of the program, and so I look forward to seeing many of you on the road. So thank you again for this honor, and I look forward to sharing the stage with many of you. Thank you.
We are thrilled to kick off the next Great Michigan Read with Curtis in 2025. Program registration will begin in the spring, and then we will begin distributing free books and materials in late summer. You can find additional details about the program on the bookmark that ushers will be giving you at the door on your way out. Thank you again for joining us this evening. I know I could have, and you probably could have stayed here all night. But we want to give you a chance to engage with the authors and get your books signed. If you didn't bring a book and you'd like to purchase one, Schuler's Books is out in the lobby. And we also have special commemorative book plates available, so please make sure to grab one of those. Thank you again for helping us celebrate the legacy of Great Michigan Read, 50 years of Michigan Humanities, and the announcement of the 10th Great Michigan Read. We'd love your feedback tonight on the event. That's how we get to design and make things for you. So if you have a smartphone, you can take a picture with your camera of that QR code and answer just a couple quick questions. And then we look forward to reading and connecting with you really soon. Thank you again so much. You can go ahead and head back up to the Pasant lobby, and all of the authors will be waiting for you in the Chrisman Lounge. Thank you so much.